name is Jim Davis. I'm the County Extension Director for the University of Florida IFAS Extension here in Hernando and Sumter counties. So if you're new to this webinar, if you don't know where Sumter, Hernando is, Sumter, we're kind of near Tampa. If you ever heard of the villages, Green Swamp, Dade Battlefield, that's beautiful Sumter County. And Hernando County has Chinsigat, and we have mermaids, right, Bill? We have mermaids in Hernando County. So the world renowned, beautiful Weeki Wachee, world renowned. And thank you guys for joining us. This presentation will be recorded. I know some of y'all, if y'all live nearby, be on the lookout for some of my hikes. I hope to get those started, hopefully November, December. And so I will be sending you some information on that. So I've been doing guided hikes for about 8 years now, 8+ years. And so I'm looking forward to getting those started again so I can hopefully meet you in person. So without further ado here, we're going to go with Dr. Lester. And Dr. Lester is an extension agent here in Hernando County and with residential horticulture, commercial horticulture, and one of the Florida Master Gardener Coordinators. So Bill, I'm just going to go ahead and pass this on to you.
Okay, no problem. And we'll go ahead and go with the camera to control and integrated pest management and insects and invasive species. And for anybody who is in Florida or familiar with Florida, you know that we're pretty much ground zero here in Florida for all kinds of different invasive species. So what I'm going to be talking about today is primarily different invasive plants that we have problems with here in Florida. But keep in mind, here in Florida, we have invasive fish, invasive animals. I'm waiting for tegu lizards to be spotted in Hernando County. I'm sure they're coming. I just read maybe 2 weeks ago, they found a new invasive species of snail down in Miami. So anybody in South Florida, you need to be on the lookout for that. And they're all dealt with and controlled in different ways. But some of the best ways that we found to control certain invasive plants has been through biological control. So that's mostly what I'm focusing on today, is different various plants. Now, problem with when you start talking about biological control, people instantly think, oh, just like those love bugs, right? When University of Florida released love bugs to control mosquitoes, oh gosh, they're going to release something else. It's going to turn out terrible like love bugs did. Well, that's not true. Love bugs were never released to control mosquitoes. They don't eat mosquitoes. Adult love bugs really just feed on a little bit of water and nectar from weeds. And the immature ones live in moist fields. They eat the decaying plant matter in the soil. And they were not released by University of Florida. They came here all on their own, bit by bit. They're native to Central America, Mexico. They came in through Texas and kind of circled around the Gulf Coast and came into Florida many years ago. But love bugs are not an example of a failed biological control program. They just kind of came here on their own. But a lot of people are confused, thinking that biological controls, you know, somebody just found an insect that they want to release, and when it's done eating the target invasive plant, after that it's going to eat their lawn or their roses or their corn or something like that. And that's just not the case, as we're going to see today. So biological control is a component of something called integrated pest management. And that's what we really recommend to people. IPM is almost more of a way of looking at things. So whether you have a problem with a weed in your front lawn, or something is chewing holes in your rose bush, or the natural area or federal park right next to your house is filled with some kind of invasive plant that came here from another country, IPM is a way of looking at dealing with those problems and controlling them. So as you see on the diagram here, it includes cultural controls. So if it's for a plant that you're deliberately trying to grow, like a rose bush or your lawn, you're going to try to grow a very healthy plant. You're going to look at irrigation, fertilization. There are physical and mechanical methods for dealing with it. Pulling weeds, mulch, solarization, trap crops. It also includes biological control. And you're going to see in a moment there's several different types of biological control, one of which we're going to talk about mostly today, but there's other ways of biological control. And IPM does include chemical controls, but you're always going to use them as a last resort and not a first resort. Because with a lot of these problems, whether it's an invasive plant, invasive animal, or some pest in your yard, there really are no magical silver bullets. There is no one thing that you can run out to the store and purchase and spray that makes all your problems go away. It's going to take a number of different steps: proper identification, coming up with a plan, doing a little reading, checking with extension, to come up with a game plan to actually control your problem and help solve it. So in the world of biological control, there's several different types of biological control. The one I'm going to talk about for the remainder of today is something called classical biocontrol. And this is used when we have an invasive plant. Keep in mind, it could be an invasive insect or invasive animal also that is here, that is not native to Florida. It came here from somewhere else in the world. And this is where scientists will go back to where that plant came from, and they're going to look at what keeps it under control there. Can we bring one of those things that feeds on it or controls it in its native habitat here to Florida safely and release it to help us get it better under control here in Florida? This also includes conservation biological control, and this is what we recommend to homeowners. I guarantee you, all of you, no matter where you live, probably have ladybugs that live at either in your yard or in your neighborhood. And ladybugs are great at eating aphids and mealybugs and other insect pests. If you create an environment where ladybugs are going to live and breed and be happy at home in your yard, they're going to give you a lot of free pest control. So a lot of times just conserving what you already have is a really good form of biological control. There's also augmentation, and this would be for if one of you had a commercial greenhouse. Let's say, for example, you had a greenhouse and you're commercially growing tomatoes. You have an outbreak of whiteflies inside your greenhouse. There are companies that raise beneficial insects that you could purchase and release inside your greenhouse, and they're gonna, feed on and kill a lot of those whiteflies, get them back under control. So augmentation is something that a commercial grower with a greenhouse would use. Doesn't work very well for a regular homeowner in your yard, because I know there are lawn and garden centers and other places that will sell bags of lady beetles during the summer, and a lot of people will purchase them and release them in their yard. The problem is a lot of times they just fly away. They don't work very well. If you were to release them inside of your greenhouse, it's contained. So in that situation, it's going to work much better. And biological control also includes biopesticides, which is a really interesting area that a lot of research is going into, finding things that naturally keep insects and plants and animals under control out in their natural environment. Things like fungi, viruses, other beneficial insects, and can we identify them, synthesize them, package them, ship them so that people can actually use them in their yard to get an upper hand. There have been plant viruses that have been identified or singled out that have helped to control invasive plants that they've actually packaged and have been able to sold. So that's a really interesting area that there's always exciting new products coming out from that. So probably the best way to explain all of this is to give you an example. Perfect example is air potato. And I'm sure any of you who live anywhere in Florida are familiar with air potato. Even if you don't have it in your yard or on your property, you've probably seen it at some point in the past just driving down the road. Air potato is, let's see, pretty much all over Florida. It ranges up into Georgia, all the way around the Gulf Coast as far away as Houston, Texas, and it's also a huge problem in Hawaii. So it affects a lot of more states other than just Florida. So air potato years ago, well, air potato has been in Florida for over 100 years. It was first discovered or identified way back in the 1700s in Louisiana, and since then has moved around Gulf states. It only lives in the southern part of the United States. It won't live too far north because if it gets too cold in the winter, it completely kills it. It won't overwinter. So with plants like air potato, it's become a huge problem because it naturally has a very rapid growth rate, spreads. It can create monocultures, as you can see in the picture here. This is of a natural area that's affected with air potato, and air potato has spread and covered everything. It's not a parasite on plants, but what it does is it covers trees and bushes and the native vegetation and blocks the light. So all the native vegetation that's underneath all those air potato leaves is going to die. It smothers the native vegetation, displaces native organisms. Very difficult to control. I know historically in the past, the only way you could control it is to physically tear it down and dig out the tubers that grow underground. Herbicides were used quite a bit in the past, but they never were very effective because the air potato would always come back. Very, very difficult for a plant that grows from an underground tuber to use an herbicide on it because you can kill all the above ground leaves, but it very quickly grows back from the underground tuber. So unless you spray it with just the right chemical control at just the right time of year, you're probably not going to control the tuber and it's just going to come right back. It was very, very expensive to control. There are crews who work for the state of Florida who go through natural areas doing nothing but chopping down and spraying invasive plants. And obviously they did their very best to control it. Nothing ever worked very well. And this is an important point for something like air potato. The reason why it's such a huge problem here is there's really no insect pests or diseases or animals or anything else that's going to eat it or help to keep it under control at all. So without putting any kind of control on it, it's just going to grow totally unchecked. So it would grow, it would spread, new areas would become affected by it. Over time, I think for all practical purposes, every county in Florida does have air potato at this point. So bit by bit, it's spread. So if you're thinking or wondering, why do plants like that become invasive? Well, here's some pretty interesting pictures that'll kind of tell that story. If we go back to where air potato is native to, and air potato originally came here from either Africa or Asia. It's native to parts of Western Africa and also parts of Asia around China. So if you go back to Africa, where air potato is native to, and look at it as you see the pictures on the left, I see the air potato leaves and they have holes chewed in them. That lower picture, that's some kind of fungus that's growing on the leaf. The leaf is obviously damaged, diseased. The stem is all chewed up. It looks pretty terrible. So there's obviously insects that eat it, possibly animals that eat it. There are fungi that inhabit it over there and damage it. I know that they have identified viruses that affect air potato. But when you take a plant like that and move it to a new area like the state of Florida, where there's nothing here that eats it, what we end up with is pictures like on the right. It grows beautifully. It spreads. It makes the distinctive potatoes. Technically, that's called a bulbil. It's a reproductive structure on air potato. It looks kind of like a potato. That's how it got its common name. So air potato in Florida, there's nothing here to really stop it. There are a few things. Lumber grasshoppers will occasionally chew holes in air potato leaves. And I have it's funny because in my yard, I never had air potato before, even though I do a lot of work with it, until I got a few buckets of compost from a friend of mine that helps to manage a small farm here in Hernando County. And they make compost on literally an industrial scale. They get truckloads of wood chips and they put them in huge piles and they turn it with a front end loader and they compost it. They work it into the soil in their farm and they grow vegetables on it. Well, he dug me up like 10 5-gallon buckets of compost and I brought it home. And the dogs had dug a hole behind the air conditioner unit. So I threw a half a bucket behind it. And darn if it didn't have a little piece of air potato in it that had survived the composting process. And boom, I have an air potato vine out behind my air conditioner now. Well, one day I went out there and looked at it and there was a caterpillar chewing on it. So I got a pretty cool video of that. But the caterpillar stayed long enough to eat maybe half a leaf and then moved on. It didn't stay to continue to feed on the plant and knock it back and control it. So even though we do technically have a few things here that will feed on air potato, we don't have much until a little bit more recently. So what researchers do in this case is they follow classical biological control. So the researchers go back to where the plant originally came from and they start looking at what keeps it from growing like crazy in its native habitat. So researchers went back to Africa. They went to Ghana and they found 2 scarab beetle species and 4 different caterpillar species, all of which eat air potato. So obviously there's plenty of insects that eat it, but none of them were very specific. And that means they were not very host specific. So many of these insects can be funny. Some insects will happily eat a wide variety of different plants. Other insects are very, very specific, and there's only a few or maybe only one species of plant that they will feed on. And if they do not have that species of plant to feed on, they will starve and they will die. They will not reproduce and they will be gone basically. So in Ghana, they found a number of insects that fed on air potato, but none of them were very specific, which meant that they all ate lots of other plants. They went to Benin, which is also in Western Africa. They found 2 species of beetles that had more restrictive feeding, but they also fed on cultivated yams. Now, yams are very, very closely related to the invasive air potato plant. And we don't raise or cultivate a whole lot of yams here in the state of Florida. We do have a couple of native species of yams that grow wild out in the woods. We have a couple other introduced or invasive species that are not a big problem. They're not as big of a problem as air potato is. But down in the Caribbean, they grow and eat a lot of yams down there. So we always have to be careful bringing a new insect or biological control here to Florida. How would it impact Caribbean islands should it find its way over there? And how would it impact plants in other parts of the United States if the insect moves from Florida to, let's say, California or Texas or somewhere else? So even though we don't have a large yam industry here in Florida, these beetles ate yams, so that kind of knocked them out of the realm of possibilities there. So researchers went on to Asia. They went to Nepal and they found a chrysomela beetle, Liliaceras chini, which you see pictured on both the left and the right here. And that looked like a pretty good possibility. So they brought these beetles back to the USDA quarantine lab in Davie, Florida in 2004 and started investigating and researching, could these beetles be released safely? Will they create more problems than we already have? And they also went to China and collected some samples from the exact same species, but it's a different biotype. So the ones you see pictured on the left that are a dark red, I believe are the Chinese biotype, and the ones on the right, which are a little bit more orange or tannish, are the biotype from Nepal. So same species, just different colorization. So they brought the beetles back here to Florida and they tested them out. So they offered them 41 different species of plants to eat. 15 species were in the same plant family as the invasive air potato vine, and then 26 other species were from outside that plant family. And what they found was that the air potato beetles would only feed on the Dioscuri species, so things that are either air potato vine or very closely related to them. The invasive species of air potato had significant feeding. The other ones only had, on average, about 0.1 square centimeter of leaf surface eaten. And what they found was that the air potato beetle larva would not even feed on any plant other than the invasive air potato vine. So even though adult air potato beetles will take a bite or two out of, it's like 2 or 3 other species of native yams, they do not feed extensively on them, and they will not breed and reproduce on them. So they came to the conclusion through several years of research that this beetle was very safe and very highly specific. It was very, very host specific and shows no threat to any other non-target plants. And I put a link down at the very bottom there. If you go online and just Google the research, the USDA research is freely available online for you to look through all the different plants that they tested the beetles on, all the different plants that they would not eat, and exactly what they found. So after this, it's not as simple as they just bring an insect back here to Florida, test it, go, oh, it looks pretty safe to release, so we're just going to let them loose out in the wild now. There are a lot more steps that they have to go through. So recommendation was given to the Technical Advisory Group for the Biological Control Agents of Weeds, which is a long name. For short, that's TAG, and we're going to see that name again in 2009. And they did give a permit for field releases. It was given by USDA. So what happened was the original colony that they had of air potato beetles crashed, because when you raise beetles in a lab for too many generations, too long. I have helped raise beneficial insects in labs before, and it's really tricky. Either they do really well or they all die for some mysterious reason, or something goes wrong. The electric goes out at the lab over a weekend or something, things happen. So they lost that colony. So they went and they got more samples from China, which, keep in mind, is a slightly different biotype, same species, but different biotype. So they had to make sure that this biotype didn't feed on corn or sweet potatoes or something that it wasn't supposed to. And that took another couple of years to do. And they found eventually that that biotype was also safe. The only plants that it fed on is the invasive air potato beetle. And they went ahead and issued a permit for them. So they were first released at Longboat National Area in November of 2011. I know that I was a part of the initial beetle releases here in Hernando County in, I think it was 2014, 2015. It takes a while, because even though Florida Department of Agriculture set up a lab and began mass rearing and releases in 2012, it took them a few years to actually expand production where they could start raising large numbers of beetles to be released around the state. So I did help with that here in Hernando County. We, our first place here in the county where we released them was up at the Chinseega Conservation Area. And we tracked them for that summer, and it was pretty amazing at how quickly they spread, because these beetles fly very well. And by the end of summer, they were basically feeding on air potato vines across the entire county. Of course, follow-up research is always done on these. And sometimes people will accuse air potato beetles of eating their rose. I've heard roses, I've heard pepper plants, I've heard all kinds of other things. But when the researchers actually go out and check, or we go out and check, or they go back in the lab and check, do the beetles eat these plants? In every last case, they found that they do not eat any other plants other than the invasive air potato vine. So what the air potato leaf beetle does is a little hard to see in this first picture here. Those are newly hatched beetle larvae. So as soon as they hatch, they start eating air potato leaves. Of course, very, very tiny beetles eat very, very tiny holes. So when they start off, they only do a little bit of damage, but as they grow a little bit larger, they do more damage. When they turn into adults, the adult beetles feed on air potato leaves also, and they eventually skeletonize the leaves. Air potato beetles will occasionally feed on the bulbils, the potato-looking structures on an air potato vine, but rarely. They really don't like the bulbils. They really prefer the leaves. And a few things that we found over time is if you have air potato vines growing, let's say in your yard, and they grow along the ground and they're climbing up into a tree, the beetles really prefer the leaves at the very top of the vine up in the tree. Their second favorite is further down. Their third favorite is the vine growing on the ground. And then their least favorite, but they'll still eat it if they have to, is going to be the actual bulbils. So with the air potato beetles, like I said, they were discovered and they were cleared for release and initially released in 2012. We did release them here in Hernando County, and I think it was about 2014 or so. Well, every winter, the air potato vines freeze back and go dormant for the winter, and the beetles disappear and go dormant for the winter also. They overwinter as adults, and they live down in the leaf litter, and many of them die during the winter, but normally at least some survive to the next spring. And then they come out of dormancy, they start to feed on the air potato leaves, they find each other, they lay eggs. Each female can lay, gosh, it's like 2,000 eggs, something like that. They're very prolific once they get going. It only takes a few beetles to turn into a large number of beetles pretty quickly. But in the spring of 2016, for some reason, they failed to overwinter in much of Florida. I know I started getting calls at the office. People were saying, you know, my beetles did not come back. Can I get more beetles? I'm thinking, you just need to go out there and look a little closer. I'm sure you have beetles. They're going to come back. They'll be fine. But sure enough, I had to go out there and do a couple of surveys. And I found like, oh gosh, there's no beetles here. What happened to them? Well, I called Florida Department of Agriculture and spoke to the gentleman who runs the lab, who ran the lab up there at the time, raising them, Dr. Chris Kerr. And the two of us went to school together. And it's like, oh, Chris, how you doing? What happened to the beetles? He said, we're not really sure. We don't have a whole lot of data on how well they overwinter in different parts of Florida and what kind of weather conditions and winter conditions lead to good overwintering or bad overwintering. I said, well, if you need help with gathering data, I can check a few plots here in Hernando County. So one thing led to another, and the two of us ended up putting together a citizen science program. So what we did was we created something that's called the Air Potato Patrol, which is a citizen science program. So all of you have the chance to participate in citizen science. We will send you, if you choose to participate, we'll send you surveys a couple times a year so that you can tell us what is happening with air potato vine and the beetles in your yard, so you could be a part of biological control research. And all this information is shared with the researchers. Dr. Kerr has left Florida Department of Agriculture. He works for Extension now up in Duval County, up in Jacksonville. But the people who are still working with the beetle, they get the data, and it really goes a long way towards helping them learn more about long-term how well the beetles do, how well they survive. Do they survive better in South Florida? Do they do better in North Florida? All these questions they have, you can help get involved and help come up with the answers for them. And if you go to the website, which is at airpotatobeetle.com, we have tutorial videos on there you can watch for free. It tells you how to positively identify air potato vine, because believe it or not, we get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from people who think they have air potato, but it turns out they don't. They have something totally different. As a part of this program, we've gotten emails from across the country from people who think they have air potato vine. We had pictures and an email from Oklahoma, I think, and as it turns out, they did not have air potato. We got pictures from, believe it or not, Washington, D.C., from somebody who really does have air potato vine growing in their yard. We have no idea how on earth it got there. It probably is not going to survive because that's way too far north. It will probably freeze and die during the winter, but it was growing right up next to their house. Maybe it's a warm enough microclimate. I don't know. So I've had a really great time working with this citizen science program. It's a really, really good way to get people involved and kind of teach them a little bit more about biological control, IPM, and some of the different controls out there that are being worked upon to help control these invasive plants. So moving on to another plant that if you live in Florida, you're probably familiar with. It's Brazilian pepper tree. And Brazilian pepper, I'm in Hernando County right now. Anywhere south of here, if you go down to Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, and any place south of there, they are just packed full of Brazilian pepper. It is all over the place down there. Brazilian pepper is a little bit different. It's kind of distinctive because it flowers in the fall, and it sets these very attractive little red berries, and the berries turn red and are ripe right around Christmas. So December, January is when they turn red. Brazilian pepper used to be used as an ornamental. That's how it came to Florida. We brought it here and we started planting it in our yards back in like the 1950s. People would plant it. And some other common names for it is winterberry or Christmas berry, because it gets pretty red berries just in time for Christmas. And you pretend it's a holly and people would make Christmas decorations out of it. Well, the problem with it is it's very invasive and it spreads like crazy because these pretty little red berries are also very attractive to birds who eat the berries and then deposit the seeds far and wide all over the place. The seeds can remain viable for a year or more. Brazilian pepper, with its growth habit, it's a multi-trunk tree. So if you have one Brazilian pepper, it will tend to lean over and start sending up more shoots. If the trunk falls over and hits the ground, it sends up many shoots. It forms a very, very dense thicket that crowds out all the native vegetation. Here in Hernando County and in other coastal communities, it's especially bad because it grows right up to the water's edge. So it crowds out and pushes out a lot of the native mangroves, which mangroves are very important for aquatic organisms. That's where the little tiny fish and crabs, kind of get their start in life, and they make their home up around the mangroves while Brazilian pepper pushes them right out. It is in the same plant family as poison ivy. So a lot of people, you have to be very careful if you're ever cutting one down or pruning it, because it gets the white sap that a lot of people are going to have a reaction to. Not everybody, but you always have to be careful with that. You want to be careful, if you burn it, you don't want to breathe the smoke in. And if you do have a Brazilian pepper growing in your yard and you go out and you just cut it down, all that does is makes it angry. It's going to grow back quickly with 10 shoots. And if you cut that down, it comes back with 50 shoots. So there are very specific ways that you have to cut it down and spray with an herbicide to kill it all the way to the roots so it doesn't grow back. So Brazilian pepper has been a major and very, very expensive to control invasive plant here in Florida. I know north of Hernando County, it's a problem mostly in coastal areas, but from Hernando County south, all the way from the coasts, all the way to the center of the state, it's a huge problem. But fortunately, researchers have gone back to Brazil, which is obviously where Brazilian pepper is native to, and they found a number of different insects that feed on it there. And they did find one that is a Brazilian pepper tree thrips. So for any of you who are not familiar with thrips, thrips are a very tiny insect, and they're kind of unusual because they have, their mouth part is called a piercing, rasping mouth part. So what it does is it basically scrapes on a plant's leaf, and then they lap up the juices that come out of a leaf. So thrips can be very, very damaging to a plant by damaging the leaf, and now the leaf, all the water escapes the plant. And we have a lot of different species of thrips here in Florida. A number of them might be pests in your landscape. One way that you could tell if your problem was thrips is the leaves on your plants all of a sudden look brown and dried out. So that's kind of distinctive thrips damage. So what they do, picture on the left here, is a perfectly healthy Brazilian pepper, has those beautiful red Christmas berries on it. And when thrips feed on it, it looks more like the one on the right here. You see the leaves are they turn brown and they look really, really dried out. I know sometimes hedges will have problems with thrips, and it looks like you turn a flamethrower on it. All of a sudden, overnight, it looks really scorched and dried out. So even this biological control has kind of a long history and took a long time from the point where it was discovered and first taken into the lab to be tested all the way up until when it was finally actually released, which was just recently. It was just July of 2019, so a little bit over a year ago is when they made the very first releases down in South Florida. So they took a very close look and researched and checked the host range for this insect back in 1996, which was quite a few years ago. And they had put in the initial paperwork with the technical advisory group, TAG, to get a permit to release them. And the first request for field release was denied because some of the testing data didn't adequately address the risk to native Caribbean plant species and to the closely related California pepper tree. So there's a pepper tree in California, which isn't even a native California tree. It was an introduced ornamental plant out there in California. So the researchers went back in the lab and they worked on it for a number of years. So they submitted a new petition to release those thrips in 2002. The revised petition did address all the different concerns that were originally brought up. TAG recommended field release in May of 2007, and then the years go on. I know that after I first learned of this biological control for Brazilian pepper, because we have such a huge problem here in Hernando County, I kind of kept on top of it because I wanted to hear when it was going to be released. Hopefully we could get some here in the county. Time went by. They finally got the final clearance in 2016. It was finally released in July of 2019. So a lot of times these things take a number of years. It's not a quick decision. It's not an easy decision. A lot of people have to look at the research and look this over and put their final signature on it. It goes all the way up to the Department of Agriculture up in Washington, D.C. before they give final clearance for it. But then that's not the end of it, because at that point they have to go back into the lab and figure out, how do we raise enough of these insects to be able to release them? And then how do we go about continuing to raise them long term to release them wherever in Florida they're needed or in whatever other states they're needed? So it takes a long time and a lot of work. But the interesting thing is there are a number of other insects that are in the pipeline that also control Brazilian pepper. And they're all, I think the interesting thing is they're all different types of insects. So it's not always a beetle. It's not even always a thrips. You see here the Brazilian pepper tree sawfly. And sawflies are a really interesting insect. It's technically a wasp that the immature sawflies look just like caterpillars. This one, they TAG recommended field release back in 1997, but there was a problem with this because they don't know if the pepper tree sawfly larvae, which look like caterpillars, contain toxins or not, and they were concerned that native animals, things like birds and lizards and anything else that might eat a caterpillar, if they ate it, would they be injured? So this one is still on hold. They're still doing more research on it to find out if it poses any kind of danger to native wildlife, because rule number one is they never release a biological control unless they're sure that they're not going to cause more problems than we're trying to address or fix. The Brazilian peppertree leaflet roller, which is a caterpillar, it turns into a very small brown moth, actually was released in Hawaii in the 1950s because Hawaii has Brazilian pepper problems also. And it's done fairly well at controlling Brazilian pepper in Hawaii, but it's never spread or reproduced really, really well to have a major impact on it. Part of the reason behind that is in Hawaii, because I don't know if anybody is watching today from Hawaii, but you guys have it even worse than us. I think that you have every invasive tropical insect pest and animal and plant and everything else known to mankind in Hawaii, because in Hawaii they had another really bad invasive insect pest, the sugarcane leaf roller, which was another caterpillar, and they released 2 species of wasp to help control it. Well, that wasp, as it turns out, also feeds on the peppertree leaflet roller. So the peppertree leaflet roller is still being looked at and may possibly be released in Florida sometime in the future, but no time really soon. So there are the Brazilian peppertree stem boring weevil is another beetle that they're looking at possibly releasing here in Florida. It's still being researched. And the Brazilian peppertree leaf galling psyllid is 100% approved. Tags approved it, and they did issue a permit for it back in June of 2019. So I believe that they are in the process of looking at how they raise enough of them to actually be able to release them. And hopefully we'll be seeing press releases and stories on actually that biological control being released hopefully pretty soon here. So very quickly, I just want to point out 1 or 2 other instances of invasive plants that are a huge problem here in Florida that we do have effective biological controls for. Tropical soda apple has absolutely no redeeming features. Keep in mind the last one, Brazilian pepper, I know that there's a little bit of a dispute over, obviously it's an invasive tree. It is not native to Florida. It came here from Brazil, and it does cause environmental problems. But sometimes people think that when we talk about invasive plants, they're always bad, they're always ugly, they have no redeeming value. That's not true. A lot of times these invasive plants might be pretty, they may flower, they may look nice in your yard, they may attract butterflies and other insects, but they still have really, really bad invasive attributes to them. So Brazilian pepper, believe it or not, is loved by beekeepers because it flowers in the fall, kind of an unusual time for something to flower here in Florida. Bees, honeybees, absolutely love it. So beekeepers love Brazilian pepper. Most everybody else does not like Brazilian pepper. Anybody concerned about, coastal ecosystems and maintaining public lands don't like it, but beekeepers do like it. Tropical soda apple, I really can't think of anybody who would like this plant because you can tell from the picture here, if you're not familiar with it, it's scary. It has those huge thorns up and down the stem, and it has the thorns on the top of the leaf and on the bottom of the leaf. And it will poke you and tear you up if you brush up against it or start trying to pull it up. This is mostly a problem for ranchers because if you look very closely in the center of that picture, you're going to see something that looks like a little green and white striped like watermelon. It's the fruit on this plant because this plant it's a solanum, so it's in the tomato family. So it's very closely related to tomatoes. It flowers and it gets a little fruit that looks like a green and white striped cherry tomato. And cattle absolutely love it. They will push past the thorns. They don't mind the thorns because they love the fruit on this plant. And they will eat it. And then when they poop, they spread the seeds all over the pasture. So it was always a huge problem for ranchers, anybody else who had pastures. People who used animal manure in farming or on their own fields, a lot of times would bring it in. We get phone calls and they say, I've never had this plant before, but now I have it all over my field. What is it? Where did it come from? Tropical soda animal. It came from animal manure. And it could also be spread from field dirt. So field dirt is a very good way to spread invasive plant species around unintentionally. But we did find a very effective biological control for this a number of years ago. Tropical soda apple leaf beetle. This was approved and it was released from 2003 to 2011. It is not currently being raised or released right now because it established fairly well across Florida. And I know that years ago when it was first released here in Hernando County, they did it in the fall and it didn't survive the winter very well. The populations were still too small. And it actually did not establish immediately here in Hernando County. I'm honestly not sure how widespread it is here. Obviously with COVID, we're not able to go out and do too many different farm and pasture visits, but I need to get out there and see if I can't find it here in Hernando County to see if it's established here or not. We get very few calls from homeowners about this problem because like I said, it's not much of a yard problem, it's more of a pasture kind of problem. But the important thing to remember is this biological control here with tropical soda apple, what it did was it feeds on it and reduces the competitive ability of the weed. So it's very important to remember as part of the takeaway message here because biological controls will never ever result in the eradication or extinction of the target plant. What they can do is they can damage the plant, they can reduce the volume of the plant growing in a field, in a pasture, in a wooded area within a county. It can help, it definitely helps to slow the spread of that plant. So if you remember when I was talking about air potato vine, initially there was nothing here to stop it and it would grow and spread and spread. I'm sure many of you, if you've lived in Florida for a number of years, maybe you participated in or you remember hearing about air potato roundups. That's where in the winter you would get a bunch of people together and they would go out to a wooded area and they rent a dumpster or two and people would gather up all the air potatoes, the bulb beetles, the little round bumpy things that look like a potato. They gather them up, throw them in a dumpster because if you leave them, they're going to sprout the next spring. So that was a way to help reduce the volume and slow the spread of it. We don't do that anymore because the air potato beetle has become so widespread within Florida that we found the first thing that it did was it feeds on, damages, and knocks back air potato vine. So the first thing a damaged air potato vine is going to do is make either very few or no air potatoes that winter. As a matter of fact, Florida Department of Agriculture, obviously to raise this beetle, they have to raise a lot of air potato vines. And I have a lot of pictures they sent me of greenhouses filled with beautiful, lush air potato vine. And then they release a bunch of beetles in there so that they'll lay eggs and make babies. And they totally defoliate all the air potato vines. Well, even they have a hard time finding air potatoes anymore to start new plants from. So biological controls do work, but they will never make the plant in question go away. They never eradicate it. So it's really best if biological controls are used as a part of an IPM or integrated pest management program. And as a matter of fact, on the Air Potato Patrol website, we have a short video on IPM program for air potato. So if you use a combination of encouraging beetles, digging up the tubers, maybe herbicides on the vines during the summer or at the right time of year, if you take a number of steps, you can get really, really good control over the air potato vine. But we never talk in terms of eradication. We always use the word control. So unfortunately, the best we're going to get on many of these invasive plants is control. the chances of us actually eradicating them so that they are gone from Florida, never to be seen again, is unfortunately pretty remote. So with that, here is a way to contact me. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any other questions about this. And real quickly, the picture on the right here, I showed pictures of the two different biotypes of the air potato beetle, and it's one species, so obviously they can interbreed between each other. And the friend of mine, the director up there, Chris Kerr, tried to interbreed them to see if he could create kind of a hybrid, multicolored offspring of the beetles. He never could, but one day he did find one that shows the two colors, the red on the left from the Chinese biotype and the more orange or tan from the Nepalese or Nepal biotype. So that's just a naturally occurring genetic mutation right there. So I said, did you really try doing that in the lab? He said, yeah, I just had to give it a try. So even scientists sometimes get a little bored in the lab and look for fun things to do.